Let's start off with the history of recording. Leon Scott's early phonograph in 1857. The first guy to think about how to capture an audio disturbance in the air, a cone that would capture air pressure, and it would actually move a needle on a glass cylinder that you'd spin. And the glass cylinder had soot on it. If you took a glass cylinder and you held it over a candle and got soot all over it, and then you'd take a needle and scratch into the soot. So it basically was a physical representation of what the air pressure was doing, because the air would come into the cone and move a diaphragm that was attached to a needle that would scratch on the cylinder. The recordings were less than a second, and nobody could even hear them. You could see what was going on, but you couldn't hear anything until 2008. They took computer generation of what was being scratched into the cylinders, and then you could hear what was being captured. So that was an interesting concept of taking sound waves. When I speak, obviously I'm creating a disturbance in the air and it's going to your ears and you're hearing me speak. So how do you capture that? Because once I say something, it's gone for posterity. The air disturbance is over once it passes your ears, and it's gone. So the whole concept of recording is to capture that and then be able to play it back at a later time. One of the things that fascinates me about recording in the first place, and I've been doing it for a long time, is when you capture some sound waves, it's some energy that's making the air molecules move. When you capture that in a representation and then able to play it back at a later time, you're actually playing back the energy that was created at the time it was recorded. It's kind of like when you look into space and you see a star and you know that the light that you're seeing has come from the star millions of light years before. So you're kind of looking back in history when you see that light. Same thing with sound. So what I'm saying here, if it was recorded and you listen to it tomorrow, you'd be capturing the energy that I'm creating now, and you'd be listening back at another time. You're kind of listening back in time. Okay, so it is a way of traveling back to a specific time, and I'm sure everybody has had this experience. When you listen to a song that maybe you grew up with, you go back in your head to that moment when you first heard that song. Next, Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison were very interested in this whole process. Alexander Graham Bell experimented with the early phonographs in 1874, and this was shortly before Edison actually invented the first phonograph. Attempting to discover how the ear worked and how to detect sound, Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison experimented with the human ear, the internal parts of a human ear. They basically looked at cadavers and dissected the ear to find out how is it that we can hear, because that was sort of an instrumental part of understanding if you could create the sound disturbance, how could we perceive it? Alexander Graham Bell created the cadaver phone, which was using a human ear. He captured sound and tried to record it. He actually used cadaver ear to experiment with recording sound in the first place. Okay, so in 1877, it was proposed using electromagnetic devices to record from a telephone onto wax-coated paper by scratching into it. Sort of the same procedure where sound would hit a diaphragm, move the diaphragm. What I mean by a diaphragm is a light, flexible piece of material, like if I held up a piece of paper and I spoke into it, you'd see it sort of moving back and forth with the air disturbance. And then attaching something to that can actually move something physically. So they'd scratch into coated wax paper, and in December 1877, the first functional phonograph that recorded from air was created instead of from a telephone. That was the origins of recording. Naturally, a business rose up around that whole concept. The competitor to the first phonograph was called the gramophone. Neither one was accepted as the standard or very successful until 1890. So you think about not that long ago that the first phonograph was created. Look at what's happened in that time period in terms of development of sound recording. It's an unbelievable explosion in the understanding of how to capture sound, how to manipulate sound, and how to recreate sound. Columbia made their first phonograph as a direct competitor to Edison, and it was originally marketed, very interestingly, not to capture music or to make music, but recording can be used in a lot of different ways, and the first way that people thought to use it was for stenographers. So I'd be sitting in my office, I'd record something, I'd give it to my secretary or somebody who could write the letter out that I just recorded. So it was a really great way that I could actually do more business because I wouldn't have to have somebody taking shorthand 24 hours a day when I'm dictating letters. So they tried initially to use it for stenographers. The industry went nearly bankrupt in 1899 when somebody had this idea of putting a coin-operated phonograph in an arcade, the Pacific Phonograph Company. There are two coin-operated machines, they had two of them, generated $1,000 each in 5 months. It was kind of like the first time somebody put a video machine in a mall. So people found this fascinating. They could record their voice and then listen back to it. Really groundbreaking at the time. It seems so obviously absurd to us now because everybody's phone, everything records, and we're so used to the concept. But back then it was a really unique thing that sort of put new ideas into how to utilize this new technology. This was considered groundbreaking technology. So disc gramophones were pioneered in the early 1890s and formed a company called the Victor Company, Victor Talking Machine Company, in 1909. Serious musicians wouldn't make recordings. In fact, most musicians were against recording because they felt that it threatened their jobs, first of all, because if you could record something, some musician playing, then you wouldn't have to go see them play. So their jobs were threatened, and they felt like it was really sort of a twisting of the reality that most musicians felt like music was a spontaneous eruption of musicians in a room at one time, creating something of a one-of-a-kind kind of a sound that people would come and pay money to hear. John Philip Sousa hated the idea of recording, denounced it as inferior to live music, and John Philip Sousa at the time was extremely important in the whole music industry. He was the guy that created all of these military marches, and most of the school fight songs were originated from his works. But he was really sort of instrumental in the early music industry. People argued that it really wasn't unique and it was an imitation of a live performance. Others argued that the ability to hear music at a later time would uplift humanity. It would be a great thing. It would bring music to more people. So if you could only fit 200 people in a hall when musicians were playing, you could record something and many more people could hear. So the idea of commerce was starting to happen. So the idea of spreading music and commerce with music was just starting to be thought about at that time.